In 2020, former Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison made a mistake that scared Chinese away from eating Australian lobsters, leading to a loss of 3 billion Australian dollars in the last 4 years. Guess who earned this money on behalf of Australian? Yes, the United States. In this episode, we will tell you how Australia won their Chinese money back. I'm Shariot, and welcome to today's topics. On 10th of October, Chinese Premier Li Qiang met with Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese in Laos. After the meeting, Albanese announced that China and Australia had reached an agreement to fully resume lobster trade by the end of this year. Indeed, this is a political achievement Albanese can be proud of. After 4 years, he has finally regained access to the world's second largest lobster market for nearly 20,000 Australian citizens engaged in commercial fishing, which will bring about 800 million Australian dollars in annual profits that was stolen by Donald Trump. China imported lobsters worth $790 million from around the world in 2023. This year, Chinese people consumed even more lobsters. According to Chinese customs statistics, in just the first 7 months of this year, China imported over 30,000 tons of lobster, with an import value exceeding $962 million. This market was nearly $1 billion. Originally, should have roughly half of it belonging to Australian fishermen. Because until 2020, Australia was the largest exporter of live rock lobster, accounting for 42% for global total on a value basis. Australia's lobster production is expected to be worth around $400 million in 2023 to 2024. In fact, the money Australian fishermen can earn in China is $800 million. This is because Chinese consumers have long believed that Australia's natural environment is better than that of other developed countries, so Australian lobsters are considered to be higher quality. According to Chinese private media Guancha, Australian lobsters' prices in the Chinese market are typically twice as high compared to other countries. Before 2020, 95% of Australia's exported lobsters were sold to China, and in 2019 alone, Australia's lobster exports to China reached 750 million Australian dollars. To put this in perspective, the final cost of Australia's most iconic landmark, the Sydney Opera House, was only $102 million. In other words, trade with China in lobsters alone could fund the construction of 6 more Sydney Opera houses each year. However, this highly profitable business was completely ruined in 2020 by Scott Morrison. During the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, without any scientific investigation, Donald Trump insisted on calling it the China virus. Although the World Health Organization conducted an inquiry, and China itself also ended up signing the resolution to authorize the inquiry, Scott Morrison still wanted to lead another inquiry into China. As a democratic country, Australia's calling to improve transparency is understandable for some Chinese people. However, after another news story broke, the Chinese began to question the fairness of Australia to lead an independent investigation. According to Reuters' report in September 2020, Australian intelligence raided Chinese reporters' homes in Sydney for no reason, questioning them for several hours and removing their laptops and mobile phones. On the same day, Australian intelligence also raided the search of the home of a New South Wales state politician, Shelke Moselman, just because he publicly praised China's policies in fighting COVID-19. China's official media commented, "In a country with so-called rule of law, there's no justification and no conclusive evidence to search homes and seize personal belongings, which is completely committing white terror." Australians are the people who truly respect the freedom of speech. Australia is the homeland of Julian Assange, and a nation where the media dare to expose scandals within its royal commission. However, in 2020, the way the Morrison government treated Chinese journalists shocked the Chinese public. They began to question whether the Australian media still had sufficient ability to hold the Australian government accountable. If Australia's food safety standards were not being fully adhered to, would Scott Morrison, faced with profits about 800 million Australian dollars annually, allow media to reveal the truth? In November 2020, China launched an independent investigation into the food safety of Australian lobsters, which led to the suspension of the lobster trade. According to ABC Australia's report, Agriculture Minister David Littleford said China was inspecting more than half of Australian rock lobsters, citing concerns about trace elements of metals. Based on 2019's data, the concerns raised by Morrison likely caused Australian fishermen to lose around 3 billion Australian dollars. So, after Australian lobsters were unable to enter China's market, who filled that gap? According to Seafood News, in 2020, the US lobster exports to China totaled 12.5 million pounds, a 130% increase year-over-year, and are outpacing their 6-year average by 14.1%. According to the Poland press held on December 2020, just in that month, the US lobster sales to China skyrocketed to $31 million, making it biggest month for US lobster exports to the country since Donald Trump's trade war hit the industry in 2018. According to the main International Trade Center's report on February 2021, the market saw declines in sales to each of its country's top 10 international buyers, with the notable exception of China, which brought more than $127 million, a roughly 49% increase over 2019. Fortunately, in 2022, the Labour Party won the election, with Anthony Albanese becoming the Prime Minister of Australia. After his election, he began to rebuild mutual trust with China. For example, even before officially taking office, Albanese indicated his opposition to the ongoing prosecution of Julian Assange. In 2022, the Australian Data Availability and Transparency Act came into effect, authorizing access to data held by Australian government. In 2023, Food Standards Australia-New Zealand introduced a new regulation, Standard 322A, aimed at enhancing food safety and preventing foodborne illnesses. These signs suggested that the Australian government is rebuilding its respect for the media and its efforts to ensure food safety. These positive developments have made Chinese consumers more willing to give Australian lobsters a chance to regain their trust. In 2 months, the Chinese people will celebrate New Year's Day with the rest of the world. In 4 months, they will also celebrate the Chinese New Year. During these festive occasions, the dining tables of the Chinese people will welcome the return of an old friend, and Australian fishermen will reap their well-deserved profits.